It is the summer of 1781. The American Revolution has dragged on for 6 brutal years. George Washington is still standing, but he is not winning. New York City, the greatest British stronghold in North America, is still in enemy hands. The Continental Army is exhausted. Congress has no money. Soldiers are hungry, unpaid, and tired of marching through a war that seems like it will never end. And across the water, the British still believe they understand Washington. They believe his obsession is New York. They believe his next move is obvious. They believe that if Washington attacks anywhere, he will attack the city he has wanted back since 1776. So Washington lets them believe it. He lets the British watch his army gather near New York. He lets them see roads being prepared. He lets them hear rumors of an invasion. He lets them intercept information that points exactly where he wants them to look. And while British commanders stare at New York, waiting for the attack they think is coming, Washington quietly begins moving his army in the opposite direction. Not north, not into Manhattan, but hundreds of miles south, toward Virginia, toward Yorktown, toward the trap that would end the war. This is the story of how George Washington faked an attack, fooled the British, and trapped an army without them realizing the war was already slipping away. By 1781, the American Revolution had become a war of exhaustion. The great early moments were gone. The Declaration of Independence was 5 years old. The excitement of 1776 had been replaced by hunger, debt, disease, and frustration. Washington had survived disasters in New York, defeats in Pennsylvania, brutal winters, mutiny scares, and years of British superiority. He had kept the army alive, but keeping an army alive was not the same as winning a war. The British still controlled New York City, and from there, General Sir Henry Clinton commanded one of the strongest military positions in North America. The harbor gave Britain naval access. The city gave them a political base. The fortifications made a direct attack extremely dangerous. Washington wanted New York badly. To him, it was the symbol of everything lost in 1776. If he could retake New York, the British war effort might collapse. But there was a problem. Washington could not take New York alone. He needed the French. And in 1781, after years of waiting, the French were finally ready to move. The French army, under the Comte de Rochambeau, had been in Rhode Island since 1780. They were disciplined, professional, and well supplied. But an army on land was not enough. To win something decisive, Washington needed naval power. That meant Admiral de Grasse. De Grasse commanded a powerful French fleet in the Caribbean. If his ships came north at the right time, the war could suddenly change. For the first time, Washington might be able to combine American troops, French troops, and French warships into one massive operation. But there was a question. Where should that operation happen? Washington wanted New York. Rochambeau was not so sure. The French commander understood something Washington did not want to admit. New York was strong, heavily defended, and difficult to attack. Even with French help, a siege there could fail. And if it failed, the revolution might lose its last real chance. Far to the south, in Virginia, another British army was exposed. That army belonged to Lord Charles Cornwallis. Cornwallis had marched through the southern colonies, fighting a brutal campaign through the Carolinas and Virginia. He was aggressive, confident, and dangerous. But by the summer of 1781, he had moved to Yorktown, a small port town on the Virginia coast. At first glance, Yorktown looked safe. It had water access. It could be supplied by the Royal Navy. It gave the British a base in the Chesapeake. But that safety depended on one thing: the sea. If British ships controlled the Chesapeake, Cornwallis could be reinforced, supplied, or evacuated. This is the detail that made everything possible. Washington did not just need to defeat Cornwallis on land. He needed to make sure Cornwallis could not escape by water, and that meant timing everything around the French fleet. When word arrived that de Grasse was sailing toward the Chesapeake, Washington faced the most important decision of the war. He could keep focusing on New York, the target he had wanted for years, or he could abandon that dream and move south. Washington chose the trap, but to make the trap work, he had to hide it from the British. Because if Clinton in New York realized Washington and Rochambeau were marching south, he could send reinforcements to Cornwallis. He could order Cornwallis to escape. He could use the Royal Navy to break the operation before it began. So Washington turned the British expectation into a weapon. They already believed he wanted New York, so he gave them a show. The Allied army remained near New York long enough to make the threat look real. Camps and movements suggested preparations for an attack. British scouts watched the activity. Information traveled through the lines. The illusion was exactly what Washington needed. To Clinton, it looked like the storm was coming straight at New York. That was the genius of the deception. Washington did not need to invent a fake target from nothing. He used the target the British already expected. New York was not a random lie. It was believable because Washington really had wanted it. That made the deception stronger. British commanders were not stupid. They were simply being shown the thing they already believed was true. And then, in August of 1781, the Allied army began to move. At first, the movement did not reveal everything. Columns of American and French troops marched away from the Hudson. Wagons rolled down roads. Artillery moved. Horses pulled supplies through dust and heat. Officers managed maps, river crossings, baggage trains, ammunition, food, and thousands of men who had to move without falling apart. This was not a simple march. This was one of the most important troop movements of the entire American Revolution. An army had to travel hundreds of miles from the region near New York to Virginia. It had to cross multiple colonies, move through towns, survive heat and fatigue, and arrive in time to connect with the French fleet. And every day mattered, because de Grasse could not stay forever. His fleet had commitments elsewhere. The window was limited. If Washington arrived too late, Cornwallis might escape. If Clinton discovered the plan too early, British reinforcements might reach Virginia first. The entire operation was a race disguised as a retreat from the wrong battlefield. Imagine being a British officer in New York. For weeks, you have been told that Washington is preparing to attack. You watch the enemy army. You study the movements. You hear reports. Then suddenly, Washington is gone. But where? Is he repositioning? Is this another part of the attack? Is New York still the target? That uncertainty was deadly. By the time the British understood what was happening, the Allied army was already too far south. Washington had bought the one thing he needed most: time. Meanwhile, Cornwallis sat at Yorktown, believing the sea would save him. He had built defenses around the town. Redoubts protected the approaches. The York River and nearby Gloucester Point formed part of the British position. From the land, he could resist. From the water, he expected help. But the water was about to close. On the 5th of September 1781, the French fleet under de Grasse fought the British fleet near the mouth of the Chesapeake. This was one of the most important naval battles in American history, even though many people barely know its name. The Battle of the Chesapeake did not look like the famous land battles of the Revolution. There were no freezing marches through snow, no midnight river crossings, no bayonet charges through redoubts. But without this battle, Yorktown does not happen. The French stopped the British Navy from entering the Chesapeake. That meant Cornwallis could not be properly reinforced. He could not be evacuated. He could not rely on the sea anymore. The door behind him had closed. Now Washington's march made sense. The fake threat against New York had delayed British reaction. The French fleet had blocked the escape route. Lafayette's forces were already in Virginia, watching Cornwallis. Rochambeau's French troops and Washington's Continental soldiers were arriving from the north. Piece by piece, the trap formed around Yorktown, and Cornwallis was still inside it. By late September, the Allied army reached Virginia. Think about what this moment meant. For years, Washington had struggled just to keep the revolution alive. He had often been weaker, poorer, and less supplied than the British. He had survived by retreating, waiting, avoiding destruction, and choosing carefully when to fight. But now, for once, the pieces were in his favor. On land, American and French troops surrounded Cornwallis. At sea, the French Navy blocked the Chesapeake. Behind Cornwallis, there was no open road to safety. In front of him, trenches began to move closer. On September 28, the siege of Yorktown began. This was not a wild assault. It was methodical. French engineers helped design the siege works. Soldiers dug trenches through mud and darkness. They opened parallel lines, moving artillery closer and closer to the British defenses. Cannon were hauled into position. Earthworks grew day by day. The British tried to resist, but the walls were tightening. Every shovel of dirt made the trap stronger. Every cannon moved forward made escape less likely. On October 9th, the Allied artillery opened fire. Washington himself fired the first American cannon. For days, Yorktown shook under bombardment. British defenses cracked. Houses splintered. Smoke hung over the town. Soldiers huddled behind earthworks while shells screamed overhead. Cornwallis had been a hunter for much of the southern campaign. Now, he was the one being hunted. But one problem remained. British redoubts still blocked the Allied siege lines from moving close enough to finish the job. So, on the night of October 14, Washington ordered an assault. 2 redoubts had to fall. The French would attack redoubt number 9. The Americans would attack redoubt number 10. To keep the attack silent, the Americans moved with unloaded muskets and fixed bayonets. No firing, no wasted time, just a rush through darkness, obstacles, and enemy fire. Alexander Hamilton helped lead the American assault on Redoubt 10. The men surged forward, hacked through defenses, climbed into the works, and overwhelmed the British position in minutes. At the same time, French troops took Redoubt 9 after fierce fighting. He tried one last escape. On the night of October 16, Cornwallis attempted to ferry troops across the York River to Gloucester Point. He hoped to break out and march away. But a violent storm scattered the boats and ruined the plan. Even the weather had turned against him. By October 17, Cornwallis asked for terms. 2 days later, on the 19th of October 1781, the British Army marched out to surrender. Cornwallis himself did not appear at the ceremony. He sent General Charles O'Hara in his place. The symbolism was impossible to miss. The army that Britain had trusted to secure the South was now laying down its arms. Between lines of American and French soldiers, this was not just a battlefield defeat, it was a strategic collapse. And the most remarkable part is how it happened. Washington did not win Yorktown by simply charging at the British. He won by making them look the wrong way. He made Clinton believe New York was the target long enough to move the Allied army south. He coordinated with Rochambeau on land. He depended on de Grasse at sea. He joined with Lafayette in Virginia. He turned Cornwallis's safe harbor into a cage. And once the cage closed, there was no way out. That is why Yorktown matters. It was not just the final major land battle of the American Revolution. It was the payoff to years of survival, patience, alliance building, intelligence, deception, logistics, and timing. Washington had spent most of the war avoiding destruction. At Yorktown, he finally destroyed a British army. Not because he had the strongest army from the beginning, not because every plan went perfectly, but because when the chance came, he recognized it. And he moved faster than the British could understand. New York was the bait. Yorktown was the trap. Cornwallis was the prize. And by the time Britain realized what Washington had done, the war was already turning against them. The American Revolution did not end immediately at Yorktown. The Treaty of Paris would not be signed until 1783. But after Cornwallis surrendered, the British will to continue the war began to collapse. The world had changed. A rebellion that once looked doomed had trapped one of Britain's major armies. A commander who had spent years retreating had engineered the most decisive victory of the war. And the city the British thought Washington wanted was never the real target. The real target was the army they failed to protect. Sometimes the most dangerous attack is not the one your enemy launches. It is the one he convinces you to wait for, while the real army is already marching somewhere else.